back. Thank you for staying with us on Monday's special, and I want to reintroduce my guests to you. Beginning from my immediate right, Mark Bichachi. He's a communication strategist, and you may know him from some of our shows. Next to him is Patrick Gavara. He is a writer and cartoonist, and most recently you saw him on our mega show on Opinion Court. Next to him is Dr. Njoki Ngumi of Learning and Development at the Nest and Hiva Fund. Next to her is Raphael Obonyo, who is a public policy specialist. Albert Shitahwa is a pastor at Green Pastures Tabernacle, Nairobi. And finally, Charles Opio is an ICT futurist. And you're all welcome to the program. Some of these faces may be new to you, some perhaps not. So the Supreme Court will kick off the petitions into President Uhuru Kenyatta's re-election tomorrow. And either way it goes, nearly half the country is bound to be upset with the decision. The other half will be happy with it. And amid that is a deeper crisis where NASA is asking for a transitional government to be put in place. So I want to start off our discussion on the note of politics. Patrick, let me begin with you. The opposition has styled this particular debate at its core being about electoral justice. Jubilee will argue it's about democracy being under threat, where the one who gets the majority does not necessarily end up forming government. Is this for you a political contest as described by these actors, or is it something different?
Well, it is a political contest, but not in the terms that these guys describe. In fact, we've got to remember both NASA and Jubilee have an interest. Both of them essentially want the presidency, and they will make their case depending on where they stand, depending on what benefits them and what makes their case look better. But I think Kenyans need to divorce themselves from that and to think, why do we keep ending up here? It's important to remember, for example, when S.K. Macharia, the owner of this station, when he went to the Senate last year, or was it earlier this year, he essentially said that every election since 1992, the person who got the most votes was not declared the president, with the exception of one, which is the 2002 election, and even that was a pretty bad election. So we've got to think, why do we always end up in these places of contestation? And I think the reason is because we keep dealing with symptoms. All we want to do is to get past, the current contestation, but not really look deeper and ask, what is the rot that needs fixing? After 2007, we laid out a really good framework for dealing with what we called fourth schedule issues. Till today, all of that has been forgotten. And now we've ended up back where we started. So I think at the root of it, for me, it is a contestation over the state, over what the state means to us. And I think we, as Kenyans, we need to understand that the state was never created with us in mind. It was essentially a tool of extraction. And the people who inherited the state from the colonialists didn't change it. They kept it as it was. And what they are doing now is fighting over it, over who is going to oppress, who is going to extract, not fighting to actually reform it and make it a fairer system that works for all Kenyans. All right.
Charles, there's a school of thought that has been pushing for talks between the now president-elect and the NASA leader. Would that necessarily result in a deal that is pro-Kenyans?
Okay, I think we have to look at it tongue-in-cheek, because talk about what? See, we've reduced the country into a consumable. Mukate, nusu, full, cake, something. So it's almost like, should they sit down and decide how to share this cake? Or are they sitting down to discuss? I think we've not even set the agenda of what they need to discuss that is beyond an election.
They say share the cake and save Kenya.
The thing is, why cake at all? Why don't we talk about Kenya first and even describe and define Kenya? Then we can talk about, should we even be sharing it, or should we all be contributing to it? I think we've got our things backwards. It's almost like taking away something. There's we have, you don't have. They took, they're taking away. So in the end, we end up discussing the same old story And so we're in a catch-22. If they sit pre-election, problem. If they sit post-election, problem, depending on who won, who is vulnerable, who is weak, who's making what demands. It's still about them sharing something. And I think we need to change the entire discussion. We need to move into, what is Kenya? Do we even know? Like Gadara rightly said, what is a state? Do we even describe the state? What's our vision? We have a vision 2030. Ask all the elected leaders to tell you what that's about. You would be shocked. Probably no clue.
But that sounds like something that can only be done once we find our way out of this political impasse. Would you agree?
I actually don't really think that's the issue, because the political impasse, like he said, it's like a recurring song. It's just there. We've never gotten past it. And even trying to get past it now, everybody still comes in with their irreducible minimums, which doesn't help us. It's about what each side wants as opposed to what's good for the nation.
Okay.
I think that's where we are wrong.
All right. Dr. Ngumi, do you agree with that assessment? And in the middle of the legal and political battle, is there an outcome to you that ensures a win for the people of Kenya and not just for political actors?
I want to go back to this idea of people sitting together to agree, and I feel as though I think we need to understand that in many ways we are a country of optics, and there's some things we like seeing. And so when we had the visit from the Anglican, from the Anglican, the head of the Anglican Church,
right.
And everybody was so excited to see that photo of Uhuru and Raila in the same place together. You know, there are some people who are just like, and I don't know. There was people that were excited about it. There were others that were not. But the optic was really important. I think there are ways in which having them sit together is useful. I don't think it captures the full situation that we find ourselves in. When we look at just the election and the counting of the votes and the varied shenanigans that we have envisioned for the last two counts, there's so many things that we miss. We miss, for instance, the situation that we're in as regards workers in this country. And so when we are here focusing on which of two men get one very incredible job, we forget that workers in this country have been on strike for so long, and that we're treating labor unions with problems. We forget that the vast majority of this country would like to be at work. They would like to either own businesses or to be employed, but they're unable to. We forget the fact that we are here saying, oh, we must be constitutional, when the 12th Parliament is unconstitutional in as far as the two-third gender rule. Right. So for as long as we continue to ignore women in the public sphere, we're going to continue to ignore them even in the private sphere. And we're seeing a lot of these conversations about sexual harassment, etc., starting to pop up. And so when we And then when we talk about which of these two men gets Kenya, and we go back to my friend's question, what is Kenya? When we think that we, the people, are currently having sprinklings of a conversation around secession, and that we have to consider secession historically. There's so much context for it. There's been threats of secession every decade for as long as this country has been a country. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we these people who, when push comes to shove, we would actually prefer to not be what we call Kenya right now? Have we had an honest conversation about that? Have we had an honest conversation about what tribal nations are and why we get to this place every 5 years where the country kind of goes into silence, nobody's able to do business, people are getting fired willy-nilly, we have farms actually falling from within, and then we are in this mess, and then now we have to watch all these performances on our news, in our newspapers, and seeing our electoral. They're the only people who have secure jobs right now. And so as regards Kenya, when we look at it in the middle of this political versus legal impasse, there's so much other stuff that was boiling and simmering that we are trying to ignore because now this has come and taken over the whole stage. But when we only look at the things that are happening on the stage between two men, and now we've become the Nyasi under the two Fahalis,
right?
We really get into a problem.
Raphael,
there's so much more going on.
Right. Is there a? I mean, Jockey has talked about the optics value of seeing people talk. Some say, you know, just to see, you know, the leaders come together serves to, you know, cool tensions amongst their supporters, etc. It shows that we can talk, that it's not, you know, serious to the extent where, you know, it can even get to blows. But beyond that, is there an outcome you foresee that ensures a win for everyday people? That's not just about who gets what positions are shared, if positions are going to be shared, or what retirement package is going to be given, if one at all.
I think we should move away from just, having short-term solutions to very serious problems that we have. We call it in public policy kicking the can down the road. You know, having short-term solutions to very serious challenges. We never have conclusive action to serious problems that we face in this country. We always treat this moment as an episode, and once it's over, we want to move to the next. And I think we need to ask ourselves very difficult, very tough questions on how do we deal with the real problems that we face as a country, and there are real challenges that we face as a country. And if we walk away from it, even now, it will keep recurring, and that's what we are seeing. I mean, it's not anything different. We've seen it over the years, and because we don't deal with the real issues, they keep re-emerging. And we have leaders who have put Kenya on autopilot, you know, and then they go back to bed, and no one is actually, we imagine that these problems are going to solve themselves, but that will never happen. And we imagine that the next generation is going to solve it, and then it might even be more complicated for them. So I think we need leaders who are decisive and who are really ready to deal with the serious challenges that we face. You know, issues of tribalism. We need to have those difficult conversations and ask ourselves, how do we move beyond where we are? There are issues of people feeling excluded. How do we ensure that beyond just sharing positions, because it's not about sharing positions, how do we have everyone feel like they're included? How do we have everyone feel like they're full citizens of this country, you know, where they can be proud of their country? These are not issues you can solve through the Supreme Court. That's a good thing, but those are not issues that can be solved there. Those are not issues that can be solved by just having Raila and Uhuru Kenyatta shake hands. No, no. These are issues that require all of us to get involved and ask ourselves, what are the real solutions to the real problems that we have? And if we don't do that, if we walk away from it, it's going to reoccur every 5 years, and perhaps now it will even be less.
Yeah.
Look at the way we are widening the divide every day. We are now more divided than we were before. Why? Because we had it in 2002, 2007, we failed to deal with it. It keeps reoccurring, but even in bigger scales.
Yeah, and I think a lot has been said about not missing those historic moments, you know, those change moments, and it appears that we have with those sort of band-aid measures that you've alluded to before. But Pastor, you were here on Opinion Court on Thursday, and part of what you said was in the political discourse, we're so interested, you know, to win arguments instead of winning people. And that appears to be what is happening across the country. But in the context of what a possible, you know, talk between the president-elect and the NASA leader would bring, how do you win people in that scenario? How do two leaders who have the support of millions have the kind of conversation that wins hearts and not just seats?
Yeah, I think we need to raise this conversation, like my other colleagues have said, above the discussion, because the narrow perspective we have about the discussion between these two leaders and what has been witnessed in the past is when they met to discuss, what was discussed about would be to do with positions, to do with sharing government and sharing power. And I think we need to raise this conversation in the country above just the issue of sharing positions and power, and get to a place where we recognize and appreciate that right now we have a serious problem as a people. Right now the country is deeply divided. We have real issues that keep coming up. The election cycle is merely something that exposes what we are struggling with as a nation. And so these real issues that we are dealing with need to come out, and we need to confront them, and we need to discuss them. But for us to be able to do that, we must recognize and appreciate that human progress does not roll, or never rolls on the wheels of inevitability. We must be very intentional and deliberate about dealing with the issues that we are dealing with, and we must rise above these positions of trying to win arguments. Because right now, when I listen to what has been going on, you find when we discuss the Constitution, we discuss, for example, the Supreme Court case. When you listen to legal minds from both sides of the camp, they both have their interpretations and they both believe they are right. And so we need to rise above that and begin to realize that it's not about being right. It's about reconciling the country. Jesus said something in scripture that if you go to the altar and you realize that your brother has something against you, you leave your gift at the altar and you go back so that you can be able to reconcile with your brother. Then come and offer your gift. We are not going to make progress as a nation if we don't appreciate that I need my brother, even if I feel they are not justified to feel what they feel. If I feel that they are wrong in terms of their perspective of what's happening in our country, and I feel like I'm right, but I still need to recognize that we need to move together. And so we need to go to a place where my attempt is not to be right, but my attempt is to walk along with my brother. You know,
okay.
My attempt is not to be to win, so that you know, at the end of the day, when all is said and done, when the Supreme Court decision ends, there will be a winner and there will be what would be considered as a loser. But we need to realize the loser is not an individual. There are people who voted for an individual, this particular individual. So that means that they share something in common. And so these people will have felt that like they have lost. And so as a country, we need to stop and go back and realize, how can we move together as one people?
Right.
You know, and rise above the tribal animosity and the tribal, you know, hate that we've carried over the years based on stereotypes that are not there. So a real conversation will help us unmask those stereotypes so that we realize that, hey, you know, I'm not any better because I'm from this tribe.
Right. And I hear you in terms of that would be the important conversation to have post this legal and political whatnot. But, you know, in order to even get to a place, Mark, where people can talk, there is the immediate situation that is presenting itself, which is, you know, who will be declared the winner of this election? Are we going back to another election contest or not? And how any decision the courts may make and whether or not leaders choose to abide by it will serve to further polarize the situation or to calm tension. So what kind of political or legal outcome can at least create the kind of environment that will allow substantial talks on the real issues, you know, then to take place?
There are a number of things that, in terms of human communication, we need to consider. Number one, no matter how complicated and expensive a painkiller is, it can never cure a running stomach. It can ease the pain, but it can never cure it. The second story is this, that in any relationship where the original sin has not been dealt with, let's say I stepped on his toe and it's been 6 years after I stepped on his toe, he's been angry for 6 years, so the argument is all over the place, yet the source was a very small thing. So we have conversations that need to be peeled back that have not been done. The third thing, and this is interesting, Kenya is one of those countries that has never really suffered major catastrophe. And I give you an example of East and West Germany. When they reconciled in 1990, if you go there today, you cannot see the division. They literally have to point it out to you for you to see there was a division. So what needs to happen? The leadership that we need now is the leadership that begins to retell and tell the Kenyan story. The problem is we have a fragmented story, a fragmented history, and because of our past, our leaders tried to paint themselves through history in a certain way. And therefore, if you ask the history of a certain part of a country, it's quite different from the history of another part. And that's why the good doctor said that we have had this conversation for 40 years. Not quite. The problem is we have a nation where lying is normal, stealing is normal, and therefore truth is factional. And that's where the problem is. And when you get into such a place, you cannot have what the Americans call an American dream, which they all agree to be. They all have an American love story. We all know what that is. When you go to Pahi, everyone wants to go to the Chomsa Lycée. That's where you want to go. Where in Kenya can we say we derive our pride and our narrative from? And this is the problem. You cannot grow a people without a story. That's why the Gikuyu have Mumbi. That's why the Christians have Adam and Eve. If you do not have a common origin story that your leadership decides to weave together, that you can then give to posterity, that weaves us together, then you end up in a situation where, because we lie all the time, your parents are okay with other tribes until you bring another woman from another tribe, and then suddenly there are issues. So it is this pretense of narrative in general that's the issue. So how do we solve it? The solution, I don't think anyone needs to be given any position, if I'm honest. But I think every Kenyan needs to have the opportunity to have our leaders sit down and listen to us. Because you know what? We actually know where we want Kenya to go. And I doubt whether our leaders do.
Okay, you've talked about the narrative surrounding our origins, and that brings me to the issue of governance and your position in particular, Gathara, because you have previously argued that the problem, at our core is this colonial state that we seem not to have gotten away from. We just sort of changed the colonial masters. But there are those who say the problem is not the system, it's the people who take advantage of the system, who corrupt the system. What do you say to them?
Well, it's true that you've got a bunch of people who sort of prey on the system. But the reason they're able to do this, because the system is set up to allow them to benefit. And I think there's a sense in which we keep running away from the state. Everybody wants to have discussions about tribalism, about inequality, without understanding that these things are inbuilt in the state. Your politics runs on the infrastructure that's created by the state. And the state does what it was created to do very, very well. We don't have a broken state. It works perfectly in what it was meant to do. So it's meant to take lots of money from everybody else and feed it up to a few. You look at our statistics, we've got 8,000 individual Kenyans who own 62% of your national wealth. That is the state working. It's perfect. Read the Ransley report. It says the police was set up essentially as a citizen containment squad. Look at how they behave. They essentially work to protect the small elite who are feeding off everybody from everybody else. And this is a thing we need to start understanding. Now, the problem isn't that Kenya has bad Kenyans, that it's Kenyans who are the problem, and we need to educate them into being good citizens, etc. You can't be a good citizen of a state that is dedicated, created, its entire purpose is to steal from you, is to oppress you.
What is the evidence of that in the system? I mean, it's one thing to argue that colonialists came here to plunder, etc., which they did, but after they left, like in terms of how...
Are we not being plundered now? Well, is there any, is there any one project you will pick out that government does that there is not plunder included in there? The whole structure of government is created to plunder. That's what they do.
That's why entrepreneurs
and that's why we have, and look at our history. There's been this idea that we only need to vote in the good guys. What did we do in 2002? We went in and took this crop of people who had a history of standing up against Moi, whose integrity was not doubted by anybody, and put them in power, and what happened? In short order, we had Anglo Lycée, we had all these scandals. In fact, we were saying the stealing is worse under them than it was under Moi. And my point is, you won't fix a systemic problem by simply replacing people. You really need to tackle and ask yourself, how is that system set up to work, and how do we change it? What are the power relationships within it? Simply branding institutions independent doesn't make them independent. We've seen that. The police are supposed to have independent command, yet the president stands up almost every day and orders them to do stuff, and they still do it. Independence won't just come from let's call things this way or let's get nice people in there. It will come when we look at what the incentives are within that system. How does it actually work? Why do we have a constitution that says, essentially, or that abolished the provincial administration system, but it is still retained under the county commissioners, regional commanders, etc. That tells you nothing is changing. Fundamentally, we retain the system as it was when the colonialists had it, as Kenyatta's father inherited it, as Moi maintained it, as Kibaki kept it, and now we have a new Kenyatta who's running it. It's still the same. And once we recognize that, I'll just end with one thing. On the counties, and I mentioned this on Thursday. What are our counties based on? We have 47 counties. They are based on 47 districts that were created by whom? They were created by the colonialists. Why 47? Why do you think they approximate to 42 tribes? In the 50s, the colonialists had actually banned organizing on a national level, politically. It was illegal. You were told only organize regionally. That's how you end up with regional parties, with tribal parties. That's what they wanted. It's what is called divide and rule. You still have that system today. You've entrenched it in your new constitution, and then you act surprised that everybody is tribal. Okay. The system creates behavior, and until we fix the system, we will keep getting the same behavior.
Charles, do you feel there's I don't know, a structural and, I don't know, a psychological, sociological something in how the state is structured that makes us operate a certain way? Do you agree with Gadara's viewpoint, or is there equally a problem with people and accountability and responsibility?
Somebody on the Thursday discussion talked about nature and nurture, which falls into the same story. You see, Kenya, we do not have a lack of capacity. Not. I mean, I lived in Botswana for 8 years, and this is the big joke. Botswana is this great success story everybody talks about that's built purely on Kenyan models. This is the amazing joke. Absolutely.
Botswana is built on Kenyan models.
Everything. Absolutely. When the president visited, I remember him talking to a group of us and basically saying in Swahili, "Mnaniaibisha," because everything that he was being shown that was working was being run by a Kenyan. Literally. And this is the point. We are like the proverbial, like the ancient Greeks. Great thinkers. The Romans came, picked their blueprints, and ruled the world. Basically. This is the same game plan. So we have this scenario. We write great blueprints. Even now we want to write new ones, which no one will ever use. It's nice. We spend, again, it's to collect money. Our blueprints are so that someone gets paid to do a great blueprint.
Okay.
Then we shelve the blueprint until we need another blueprint to question the first blueprint. So in simple terms, we've got two systems running. In one, like you said, we are like, you remember the story of the emancipation of the slaves? There was the house slave and there was the field slave. And these two people operated differently. The house slave didn't think he was a slave because he wore the master's old clothes. And when he came outside, everybody had to respect him because he's wearing the master's clothes. You understand? So this is the guy who the master used to whip the others. This is the guy who basically, so when the slaves were freed, the house slave didn't leave. He didn't know how to operate out there. Because to other guys, anything is better than where we've been. But to this guy,
I'm wondering if I should ask you in the Kenyan scenario. No, let's not.
I'm going to leave it to everyone to want that one.
Although what you had said before, which is what I thought you would come back to, and it's very important, is this idea of Kenya as a cake. Yes. Everybody speaks of let's go share the national cake as if it exists up over there, and we just send people to get us our share of it. Yes. And that's the thing. That's how we've been taught to think of the state, as something that is there to be eaten. And so when we see guys
not only eaten, but also finite, because people eat cakes and finish them. So once we have eaten them, what will there be left? What will we eat for the next meal? Who is the we that is left, and why will we be hungry?
Absolutely. And in Kenya, the principle is, sorry I'm caught, not sorry I'm wrong. And this is the problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So if it's about, I don't know, Raphael, do you agree with that? Is there a fundamental problem with the state? If there is, how do you fix that?
I mean, there is a fundamental problem with the state, but I don't want to make it that complicated. I think I just want to, isolate three things, which I think we also need to fix as we also try to bring down the Kenya and try to, fix it. I think one is the leadership. every other election we change the face of leadership, but we never change the soul of leadership. It's just about new occupants. I think if we get the right leaders, then it is easier to march towards, you know, a redesigning and restructuring the state. So we need the right leaders. I think we never get that. And you see the way elections are. It's about money. It's about patronage. You know, it's about, you know, tribe. It's about all these things. So I think leadership is key. But the other thing is citizenship. I think citizens disengage themselves and imagine someone is going to fix the problems for them. I think citizens need to remain engaged. I think the only way to fix the problem that we have is to not allow the politicians to be the only players, because that's what we've done. The politicians are the only players. Citizens need to get engaged, and we need to rise to new levels of consciousness, because unfortunately we also behave and think the same way as our leaders, who have very low standards, unfortunately. And then the third thing is the institutions that we have. I think if we do not have strong institutions, if we do not have independent institutions, if we do not have professional and competent institutions, we'll continue facing the same challenges that we are facing. So that, and perhaps many more, are things that we need to fix if we are to sort of have a rebirth of Kenya, the Kenya that we want.
Just to buttress his point, you know, if you look at the history of the world, and you can start from Germany, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, you go to Tanzania, you've got Mwalimu Nyerere, you go to India, you've got Gandhi, you go to France, you got the revolution that was led against the monarchy that was there. You see, at the end of the day, whereas institutions could be the problem, but you do need altruistic leadership, forward-thinking leadership for a period of time that takes over and restores sanity. What is required actually for any state to succeed is a leader like Nelson Mandela, a leader like Nyerere, who's able not to set the tone of infrastructure, not to set the tone of even how you develop the country, but who's able to set the tone of the morals, the ideals, and the direction of our nation. Kenya is not morally bankrupt. We are just not moral at all. You understand? That's the problem. This is what I mean. No, what I mean is we elect leaders who are able to abuse other leaders in public. This is what we do. So that immorality cannot succeed in wealth. It cannot work. The only way immoral people become wealthy is if they steal, kill, and destroy. That's the only way it works. So unless we have a bar that sets a standard where it means this is what it means to be a Kenyan, not even a leader of a Kenyan, what it means to be a Kenyan, then that's the
certain values.
Yes, the day Kenyans will stop honking at you because you stopped at a red light, then Kenya is changing.
But you know,
That's the
but where I disagree is this. Again, our values, I think you've got to understand, operate at two levels. There is the communal value, you know. You go to many communities, people are very moral, you know. I mean, when you see people beating up thieves, it's because they don't like.
Why? Let's ask ourselves, why are they beating up the thieves?
But I'm saying at that level, at the community level, you know, people are very moral. They really insist, you know, on these things being done. But at the state level, it's different. And that's because people fundamentally understand the state does not exist for them, you know. And that's why they can tolerate bad behavior up there. You're simply getting us our share of the cake.
Let me ask a silly question, if it is. You know, when you say the state, what exactly are you referring to?
It's a mechanism of governance. That's what it is.
Okay.
You know, it's this thing that was set up to regulate us, to
maybe let's use
to set rules for how we.
But it doesn't operate. It operates under a constitution. One of the best in the world.
That's a good thing.
I actually want to say something about the word moral, and I find it so interesting that we've used it. It was odd for me. It was profound and odd that we didn't use the word moral when we talked about the delivery of a failed electoral process, because at all levels there were several moral decisions that needed to be made. It is a moral decision to sign a paper that you're supposed to sign when 7 people in the room are supposed to sign it. 7 people sign, another person gets it handed over with another form. All of those are moral decisions, but it's difficult for us as Kenyans to see those as moral decisions, to get from 34A and B and C to all the places where they're supposed to go. So those are things that are moral. And when we refused to have a difficult conversation with IEBC at that point in time when the Supreme Court made their judgment, that for me was a moral gap. We're used to using the word moral in our country to discuss what women wear, for instance, who different people are sleeping with, is somebody being adulterous, you know, things like that, where it feels like sordid and odd, sugar daddies, you know, those things that make life interesting, I suppose, or that make life scandalous, you know. But when we go back to what morals are, it refers to doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons, and all these layers are things that we refuse to engage with.
That's my point, is at the state level, that is not rewarded. In fact, it is punished. You know, if you decide to be a nice, good person,
actually my
point, Njoki, is that if think about our elections, think about the fact that since the 1960s, every election we've had, there's been a turnover of more than 50% of MPs. Basically, we take out all these people we say are bad, who are stealing from us, and we put in new guys. Behavior doesn't change. It's the same. In fact, it gets worse. And I think if we start thinking that the problem is just that these politicians we're electing are bad, you know, without looking at the structural constraints they work in and what behavior that system incentivizes. That's how you end up with people like Amos Wako, who, when he was appointed by Moi, was fitted, you know, as, you know, one of the best lawyers, human rights guy. A few years in government, he is one of the worst guys. You know, every person we took in 2002, almost all without fail, you know, suddenly turned, changed, became different. That tells you something, that the problem isn't their personal values. You know, the problem is the system you're putting them in. If you, as one guy once said, if you take a good apple and throw it into a rotten barrel, you know, don't be shocked that it gets rotten. You know, and that's what we are doing. We keep taking all these people and feeding them into a rotten system and expecting miracles. It would happen.
So what is your answer to
you know, and that's why that's why to his question, you see, he's quite right that if you create an institution aimed at basically plundering the people, that is what it will do. However, let's remember that the colonialists were people too. The people who inherited that system were people too. The people who created that system are people too. Therefore, it behooves the people who take on those reins to have sacrificial leadership. Meaning that at some point, whether it is you or me or anyone else listening to me, who decides to take the moral stand, and I like what she said, a moral stand to do right no matter what. That's what it takes. You see, every state in Africa, and I've had the privilege of traveling a lot of countries, is that you realize that the leader who decided to do right no matter what changed his nation. And you have examples like Nelson Mandela, who inherited an apartheid system. That's the worst system you can inherit. But because of his personal sacrifice, the system began to change. And that's what we need. If you're going to change a system, it is not aliens from us who are going to come and fix it from us. It has to be us to make the moral decision. And you see, the reason why I'm using the term moral is we have to rise above even the constitution, because morality goes into your bedroom and how you discuss things in the darkness of your bedroom. And when you make the right choice there, when no one else is seeing, you'll make a right choice. But you know,
I want to follow up this thought about I wouldn't want to call the crops of leaders that we have only victims of a rotten system. I think that is true. I think the other thing that we forget is that power makes people see things differently. It completely distorts our views. When we talk about sacrificial leadership, and I want to use this example because it's one of those things that's usually thrown around. So fathers are supposed to be the leaders of homes. You know, how much sacrificial leadership are we seeing from fathers in this country? How many fathers who do not live with their mothers and their children, who don't live with their mothers and their children, are paying, for instance, child support? Okay, so when we say that power makes us see differently, even at the micro level, it's interfering with the ways in which we see. And even at the macro level, it's going to interfere in the ways in which we see, where you come, you realize that you have all of this at your disposal and you can make autonomous decisions the way you want, and then you just make them. You make the first one, nothing happens. You make the second one, nothing happens, and so on and so forth. So that was my first point. The second
So do
one,
they have too much power? Should we take some power from it, devolve it to more?
And actually, that was going to be my second point. That I think Gathara is right when he says that the way the state is engineered makes it relatively easy for people to be able to misappropriate state resources. And so that was one thing that we devolved to kind of to kind of deal with. Even though there are many jokes about how the only thing we've successfully devolved is corruption, I think the devolving for the people across and money and everybody money that when we say 5 billion what are we saying? Like are we dumb? We are not, but so we are euphemizing the facts, and the fact is that money moved from point A to point B. The thing we need to be saying is that we have refused to realize what point B is. So let's say that money is currently in point B. We don't know where that point B is. Not it disappeared, because resources don't disappear. That would be like saying you have an oil well and the oil disappeared. As opposed to it was siphoned by a truck whose driver did not know. So the thing that we need to realize is that devolution, and also by giving state less of a hold on county resources, we make it easier for people to see when things are being wrongly done. And if we devolved properly, I honestly think we would be solving some of the hugest problems as regards resource distribution in this country. We would be kind of easing some of the wounds that have made people hearken to the idea of secession as a way to solve problems. We'll be solving the issues we see in the North Frontier. We'll be solving some of the issues we see in the western side of this country. We'll be solving very, very many things.
You know what Well, Gathara, I beg your pardon, because we're absolutely out of time, and I want to get my left corner to speak to the left on the issue of leadership. And Mark talked about, doing good no matter what. And I just wonder whether you see that being possible, and what kind of leadership you're looking to from President-elect now and the NASA leader. How can they do good no matter what? I mean, the stake is this state, which we know now its potential, at least based on what Gathara has said.
I think, pulling in from the various discussions, one of the things we are seeing clearly is there was the monster created called state, where people want. So then we decided leadership equals the one who can access state versus the one who can control on behalf of. So we need a redefinition of terms. This country needs to understand what's leadership. To go back to what Mark said about suddenly leadership is the guy with the most votes. Is that a leader? That's a winner. That's not a leader. You understand? So we need to totally change that narrative and have this new measurement of what we call leadership, under which people are measured. Nomination is not about who is popular. It's about who is a leader. So our structure is already wrong into where we are going. So if leadership, those two issues come in, moral, but also what's leadership. In Kenya, leadership is a person. It should be an office. In terms of politics, it should mean Anne is going into this office because she's capable of carrying out ABC, not because of who she is. See, this is a problem we have. It's about the who. So much so that positions have become rewards. We hear leaders say, don't worry, even if you fail, we'll find you a place. Why do you want to find him a place?
And
he lost. Kick him out. Bye-bye. What is he coming to do? And it's sad even he lost. Please notice. It's not about him being a leader or not. It's become a competition. In fact, we even say, our Swahili word, kinyang'anyiro. I mean, what are we talking about?
But I hear
it's what are we talking about? Are we talking about this great race? Listen, let's keep our marathons on the road, but leadership is not about who won. It's about who can bring us home.
So finally to you then, Pastor, because at the end of the day, the way in which democracy structured is that you run that race. All right, you run the somebody who emerges first, right? How does that person then transform from being a winner of a race to a leader? And in that respect, regardless of where the courts send us, is it back to another election, or is it upholding the one that we've already had? A leader needs to emerge. And so what would that look like for you? What are you looking for?
There comes a time when someone has to make a decision that is neither politic or expedient, but what is right, like Mark said. And, you know, for that to happen, one must rise above the narrow confines of self and selfish interests to the greater good of the nation. And we talk that way. We talk about, or our leaders would talk that way, but in essence, that's not the reality on the ground. And so we need a situation where our leaders begin to look at the greater good of our nation for us to be able to change the tide of what's been going on. We need that kind of a leader. And so whether the leader comes through election, which is basically the democratic process that we have subjected ourselves to, which can almost yield to us a leader that may not necessarily be a leader, but a winner, like he says. But for me, the thinking is the solution to our country is not something that can be, it's not short term, it's long term. We need to begin to intentionally develop a value system in our nation that our children can begin to learn from when they are young, that will identify them, not, in the school, for example, where my children go to, one of the things I noticed that they do is, apart from singing the national anthem, they pledge allegiance to the country. I like that. I like the idea that they identify not with their tribe, but with the country. And as they grow up like that, and we begin at that place where values are entrenched in the children as they grow up, then we are going to change this country.
I thank you all for coming. I had to say that first because we're out of time. I am so sorry. And everyone is looking at me like, no, and yes, we are. So let's have this conversation again. And maybe we pick up from your very careful choice of words. And you're saying the democratic process that we have subjected ourselves to. So is democracy working for us? Capitalism, all these things. A conversation for another time, but I thank you very, very much for your great conversation and views tonight. My guests in studio, Dr. Njoki Ngumi, Raphael Ubonyo, Mark Bichachi, Patrick Gathara, Albert Shitahwa, and Charles Opio. And thank you very much for watching. We'll keep having these conversations that go beyond the political parties and their clamor to what are the issues for everyday Kenyans. Thanks for watching tonight. I'm Anki Guta. God bless, and God bless Kenya. Bye-bye.